Welcome to a video on secure file transfer protocol in decisions. In this video, we will look at the following topics. What is FTP? The need of FTP. What is SFTP? SFTP architecture. SFTP in decisions and a short demonstration of FTP in decisions. So what is FTP and why is it needed? FTP is a standard communication protocol operating in the network layer. There are many other protocols for communication such as HTTP, which also do a file transfer, but FTP is preferred over these communication protocols because of its nature to transfer large bulky files. FTP encourages the direct use of remote computers. It shields users from system variations, like differences in operating system, directory structures, file structures, etc. It promotes sharing of files and other types of data. All data, including the username and password, is transferred in plain text, which makes it easy for an attacker to intercept the transmission. To overcome the drawback of FTP, we have a secure version of it. SFTP stands for Secure File Transfer Protocol. It is also a network protocol to share files using the internet. Here, the encrypted files are transferred over the network, adding a layer of security. Now let's look at the SFTP architecture. The SFTP file transfer starts with a transfer request from a client system, and it establishes the connection. The request goes through the interface and requests for a file transfer from the FTP server. This FTP server processes the request and sends an encrypted file into the network. This encrypted file is encrypted using different SSH algorithms like DSA, RSA, etc. Finally, this file over the network is decrypted, which then reaches the client system. SFTP server uses port 22 to process the client request. Now let's look at what is a local path and a remote path. Local path refers to the path of any file or directory within the client machine. For example, the local path usually starts with a directory like C, navigating through users, documents, and FTP storage. Remote path, on the other hand, is any file or directory on the server, which starts with a protocol like FTP / the host name. In this example, it is 198.162.1.92, followed by the path on the directory structure on the server. In this example, it is FTP / mydoc.docs. Now let us quickly look at what do we exactly mean by local path and remote path. Consider I am accessing a text file called my data. So this path over here, where the file is actually located on the client machine, is called as the local path. However, if we want to access the files on the remote server, we would usually use a path as such. That is FTP with the host name, followed by the directory structure where the file actually exists on the server. For example, FTP / mydoc.docs. This path is known as the remote path. Now let us look at a demonstration of FTP in decisions.
For this demonstration, we need to establish a client-server architecture to access the files from the FTP server. So here we have an FTP server at this particular host with 3 different files in it. Now let us use decisions as a client to access these files. Open a flow designer in the Decision Studio and access the FTP steps from integration and the FTP folder. These steps are broadly divided into 6 categories. To create a directory in the FTP server, deleting a file using FTP, downloading a file from the remote server, to list all the files present on the remote server, move a file from one directory path to another, and upload a file from the physical system or the client system to the remote server. Now let us look at these steps one by one, starting with list remote files. So let me get this list remote files and make a connection to the FTP server. The host is this one, which uses a port of 21, and we need a FTP user to connect to the remote server. The remote path is slash, and it returns a list of files that can be read and processed further in the flow. Now let's start debugging and see that the files that are there on the remote server is being returned here. Next, let us see how to download a file from the remote server. For that, we use the download step and fill in the properties. Again, we use the FTP user for the username and give the password. Now, the file name that we want to download here would be mydata.txt, which is there on the remote server. So let's give the output file name as mydata.txt, and the remote file path would be slash mydata.txt. Please note here that we have to give the file path along with the file name for the remote file path property. And it will return file data as the output that can be further processed in the flow. So let us debug that and see the input and output. Another step that is very similar to download is the download to file system. So let's see what this step does and how is it different from the download step. Configure the properties of the download to file system step as shown here. Here we need to give the output file path, which is the physical path in the client system. I'm using this as the client system where I will download the file mydata.txt from the remote server to the client system. So copy the physical path and give it in the properties. Ensure that you also mention the file name here. The remote file path would be slash mydata.txt. So let's debug this. And we see that the data is found and it is downloaded to the client system. One thing to note here is the difference between download to file system and the download step. Download step provides the file data to the flow designer, which can be further processed in the flow, whereas the download to file system does not return any file data and only places the file in the physical path that is provided. The next step that we would look at is create remote FTP directory. So I want to now make a directory in this remote path by the name new directory. So let's give that in the remote path and debug. Now, as you see here, we have created this directory in the remote server. Now let's move this document into the new directory. So for that, we would get the move file by FTP and configure its properties. For the destination file, we would give slash new directory slash my doc.docs. And for the remote source file path, we give slash mydoc.docs, where the file is actually present. So let's now debug this to see the changes. It says the file is moved. Let's cross-verify that in the remote server. So as you see here, upon refreshing the remote server, the my doc is no longer present here and can be found inside the new directory. Let's also see what the upload step does. The upload step uploads a file from our local system to the remote FTP server. So let's choose a file from the local system. For that, use the constant mapping option for the file property and choose a file. So here I'm choosing the file called upload file. And I am giving the path as slash new directory that would place this file in the new directory that I created slash upload file dot txt. So let's debug this and see that in action. If we go back to the remote server and access the new directory, we would see that this upload file.txt is being uploaded to the remote FTP server. Finally, let's choose the delete file step to delete the file that we have just created. So for that, again, configure the properties, and for the remote file path, give the entire path as slash new directory slash upload file dot txt. So let's debug this now, and we see that the file is deleted. This can be cross-verified by going back to the remote server and refreshing this page. Now, as you see, that upload file text is being deleted.